The sun over the red plains beat down like a blacksmith's hammer. In 1872, the land was unforgiving, and so were the men who tried to claim it. Taye sat astride his best paint stud, feeling the heat shimmer off the packed earth. The horizon wavered in the heat, and the air tasted of dust and thirst, a flavor he knew deeper than any bread. At 24, he carried more than his own weight. He carried the hunger of his people like a stone lodged in his stomach. The Comanche had roamed these lands when it was nothing but buffalo and sky. Now fences, claims, and drought ruled. His horse, a coiled bundle of muscle, shifted patiently under him. Beside him, Koa, barely 16, fidgeted atop his pony, trying to seem indifferent. A blade of dried grass rolled in his mouth betrayed his nerves. "We trade," Taye said quietly, his voice rough from the dry wind. "No fighting." "They don't know the difference," Koa muttered, spitting out the grass. "To them, just breathing is a fight." Taye said nothing, eyes scanning the string of 4 other horses he led. Prime breeding stock. Their coats gleamed even under trail dust. These animals were more than property. They were survival, the price of cornmeal, salt, and rifles to keep the band fed through the high plains' choking drought. This was the war that mattered. Survival, patience, horses. The empty glory of violence belonged to others. The settlement lay ahead like a scar on the plains, a mile-wide smudge of sod huts and rough timber buildings growing like fungus around the one reliable source of water. And the saloon. The sense hit them before the buildings did. Stale beer, unwashed bodies, horse dung, and the sharp, acrid tang of desperation. Inside, the frantic scrape of a banjo clawed through the thick afternoon air, a sound that promised no good. Amid the chaos, Lila wiped down a rough plank table, knuckles raw from labor. 21, Irish stock, orphaned, sturdy despite her small frame, she carried the dust of a long journey from back east deep into her bones. But it hadn't touched her dream. A locked chest of books, a fierce belief that children needed letters more than cruelty. These were hers to hold. She lived off the bitter charity of her uncle, Amos, a man whose hospitality was as thin as his whiskey, smiling easy while his debts and small cruelties mounted. "More glasses, girl," Amos barked from behind the bar, not even looking at her, his eyes fixed on a cluster of men at the far table. His voice was too loud, too friendly. Lila flinched but kept her gaze low. Every coin she earned in that smoky, suffocating room felt heavy with shame, a payment for her independence, her dream of a school. Taye dismounted, leather whispering against his legs. He left Koa with the horses, a silent command passing between them. Water and watch. He moved with coiled grace, moccasins silent on warped boards. The saloon doors swung open, and he stepped inside. Smoke, sweat, cheap perfume, and the sour stench of human failure hit him like a fist. The crowd was a mix of the displaced, coal farmers, sun-baked and suspicious, Mateo vaqueros, quiet, sipping tequila, reed freighters arguing over the railroad rates. His people huddled along the walls, shadows pressed against the wood, waiting for the law to change again. The iron snake of the railroad was coming, devouring the plains, bringing a new kind of man. Taye's eyes found them at the main table, boots propped, hats pushed back. Not troopers, just men who believed power came from wealth, ownership, and fear. Even a few uniformed soldiers lounged nearby, eyes vacant with boredom and whiskey. Pike, that name whispered in camps, boasted about in saloons, controlled this new order. He was buying the land, the water, the politicians. Silas cast a long shadow over the railroad, and his reach stretched wide. One of Silas's men, a foreman with a heavy gut and a stained vest, laughed loud enough to echo through the saloon. Slapping the table, Amos announced, "Got prime stock tonight? Something special." A cavalry sergeant, his tunic dark with sweat, smirked into his mug. "What kind of stock? Not more of his stringy beef, I hope." "Better," the foreman said, leaning in, his voice a low rumble that carried across the room like a secret. "A proper marriage auction. Amos even got a drunk preacher to make it legal." Lila froze. Her hand gripped the wet rag, knuckles white. A marriage auction. She had heard whispers of such things, dismissed them as the crude jokes of lonely, cruel men. It was a vile practice, used in the rougher settlements, a thin layer of law painted over the simple act of selling a person, a way to move a woman, an orphan, a widow, to whoever paid the most, bound by a piece of paper blessed by a half-hearted minister. Amos was sweating now, even though the saloon was cooler than the blistering sun outside. He spoke to Silas's main lieutenant, Wade, lean, quiet, with eyes as flat and cold as river stones. He didn't waste time with the loud-mouthed foreman. He was the one who enforced the rules. "She's a good girl," Wade said. Amos whined, voice trembling despite his effort to stay low. 21, educated, reads books. She just needs a provider, a proper home." "Silas wants this settled," Wade said softly, almost emotionless, which made it all the more terrifying. "The debt is due at sundown. You said you had collateral," Lila thought, blood draining from her face. Collateral. She was the collateral. Her dream of a schoolhouse, her small, fierce independence, the books in her trunk, her very self. It was all just barter for her uncle's gambling debts. She glanced at the men at the table, Silas's men, and they stared back at her, not as a person, but as an object, an item up for bid. Taye watched from the shadows near the door, his eyes adjusted to the dim light. He saw her, young, pale, trembling in a fear unlike anything the plains could summon. This was the fear of men, of cages made of wood and law. He saw her uncle, a weak man, twisting his hands. He saw Wade, a strong man, which was always worse. He had come for flour and salt, to trade horses for his people's survival, but he recognized the pattern. The strong taking, the weak being sold. The law of the railroad, the new law that said everything, even a person had a price. Taye stepped back into the blinding white sun, the bat-winged doors swinging shut behind him. The frantic banjo music chased him like a curse, thin and desperate. He had to tend to his horses. They were his only leverage here, but he knew, cold and certain in his chest, that he would return before sundown. The stone in his gut felt heavier now, not just hunger. It was a familiar, freezing rage. Sundown bled across the plains, turning the red dust the color of a fresh wound. Inside the saloon, the air thickened, hotter still. The kerosene lamp smoked, casting a greasy yellow glow that made every face appear sickly or cruel. The banjo hammered a frantic rhythm that set Lila's teeth on edge. She pressed herself against the back wall near the kitchen door, trapped. Amos had forced her into her only Sunday dress, a pale blue cotton that felt more like a burial shroud than clothing, clean and utterly exposing her. She became a bright target in the smoky gloom. Every man in the room watched her, eyes measuring, speculating. Amos, face slick with sweat, climbed onto a crate, hands raised, smile a desperate grimace. Gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The banjo faltered, then stopped. A low murmur of conversation died, replaced by a hungry, expectant silence. At the front table, Wade sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on Lila, not Amos. "We all face hard times," Amos began, voice shaking, trying for the tone of a salesman. Drought, freight costs, a man finds his debts stacked high, but I am a man of honor. A harsh laugh came from the back. Your honor's worth about as much as your whiskey, Amos. No, no, Amos waved his hand. I mean to pay. I have collateral, an asset. He gestured toward Lila. She froze. Her blood ran cold. This was it. It was real. My niece, Lila. Amos's voice cracked as he shouted, a fine, educated woman, 21 years old, a teacher, alone, unprotected. She needs a husband, a provider, he bellowed toward Silas's foreman. Get on with it. This ain't a tea party, Amos muttered, swallowing hard. Tonight, to settle my debts with Silas, the contract for her hand goes to the highest bidder, a legally binding document, blessed by Reverend Holt himself. He jabbed a finger toward a small, rat-like man in a stained frock coat slouched at a table, clutching a bottle beneath a metal stamp. Laughter erupted across the room, crude and loud. Men pressed forward, eager for their chance. Lila pressed back against the rough wallboards, heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She looked for a way out, but the kitchen door was blocked, and the front door was a sea of broad, sweating backs. Do I hear $10? Amos yelled, trying to sound like a real auctioneer. 10! A drunken freighter bellowed, grabbing at his belt. As he 10, do I hear 15? Another voice slurred. Wade watched from the table, a faint, cold smile tracing his lips. He let the small bids play out, savoring every moment of her humiliation. He would let them push the price to $30, maybe $40. Then Silas would step in with a single, final number, crushing all hope. Silas wanted this girl. He had been offended when Lila refused to serve him whiskey last week, looking through him as if he weren't there. Silas did not forgive slights. He would take her and break her, using the law itself. 25? 30? I'll give 30. Lila closed her eyes. Nausea churned in her stomach. Her dream ended here. There would be no school, only this. The batwing door slammed open, swinging back hard against the walls. Silence fell like a blanket. Taye stood in the doorway, the bloody sunset framing his broad silhouette, making him seem larger than a man, carved from the dark earth and dying light itself. He paused, unmoving, letting his eyes adjust to the smoky gloom. He took in the men, faces a mix of fear and hatred. He saw Amos on the crate, mouth opening in surprise. He saw Wade, hand inching toward his pistol, and he saw Lila, pale as bone, pressed against the wall like a trapped rabbit, her eyes wide with terror beyond anything the plains could teach. He stepped inside. Koa followed, face set in a mask of nervous defiance. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a narrow path. Taye's moccasins made no sound on the filthy floorboards. He stopped in the center. Amos, spotting a new, savage customer, tried to regain control. This is a private auction. Taye, white men's business. Taye ignored him. His gaze swept from Lila to Wade, then back to Amos. You have a debt, he said, voice low but carrying through the silent room. I do, Amos stammered. With Silas, this is how I'm paying it. 2 paint studs, Taye said. The breeding stock of the railroad, and this. He slung a heavy leather pouch from his belt and tossed it onto the floor at Amos's feet. It landed with a solid metallic thud. Silver, more than enough to cover the debt. Silence stretched thick and heavy. 2 paint studs, prime breeding stock. A fortune, more than the girl was worth, more than the entire saloon, an impossible bid. Amos stared at the pouch, greed living in every line of his face. Wade rose slowly from his chair. The scrape of wood on the floor was unnaturally loud. "This is not his auction," Wade said. "Amos," Taye's voice was soft but deadly. "Silas's bid has not been placed." "He named a price for a debt," Taye added flatly, eyes locked on Amos, not Wade. "I paid it." "He's right," Amos squeaked, relief flooding him. He scrambled off the crate and snatched up the pouch. "The debt is paid, sold." "No," Wade hissed. "You just sold Silas's property." "It's an auction," Amos yelped, stepping back. "Highest bidder gets her." "This is not—" Wade stepped forward, voice calm but deadly. "A legal sale," Amos shot back, desperation cracking his tone. "He cannot marry a white woman." "Legal it is," Amos shouted, clinging to the thought of horses and silver. "Preacher, get the paper! A marriage contract, proper and binding!" Reverend Holt staggered to his feet, fumbling a creased, pre-signed paper from his coat. "It is. Binding as God is my—" Taye moved. He strode past Wade, who tensed like a coiled spring, fury simmering in every line of his frame. The other men instinctively stepped back, clearing a path. He stopped before Lila. She pressed harder against the wall, eyes squeezed tight. She expected him to grab her arm, to claim what had been bought. But he did not. She opened her eyes. He stood just a foot away, simply watching. The smoky light traced the lines on his face, carved by sun and hardship. He looked tired, lean yet unyielding. He leaned in slightly, voice a bare whisper, meant for her alone. "I bought protection," he said. "Not your body." Lila stared, mind numbed with terror. "Protection?" Reverend Holt shoved the paper and a stub of pencil toward Taye. "Make your mark, Comanche." Taye took it, drawing a swift, firm line. Then the preacher pushed the paper toward Lila. "Your name, girl, here." Her hand shook violently. She could barely hold the pencil. She was signing her life away. But Taye's words echoed in her mind. "Not your body." She looked at him again, impassive, not watching her, watching Wade. She scrawled her name, jagged and uneven. "Done," Holt yelled, slamming the metal stamp onto the paper, smearing the ink, binding the contract. The crowd surged, angry. "This ain't right! A Comanche, he stole her!" "You just bought yourself a war, Taye," Wade said, calm but eyes glinting with promise. "Silas won't forget this. He'll take the horses. He'll take her." Taye said nothing. He moved toward the door. Lila remained frozen, pressed to the wall, suffocating under shame. She had been sold, a woman-turned object. He paused at the door, glanced back. Saw her trapped between the crowd and her weeping. Saw Amos counting silver with greedy satisfaction. Saw Wade, flat, cold, a promise of danger. Saw every hungry, cruel face. Then he slowly removed the heavy wool cloak from his shoulders. Worn, but clean, scented of horse, dry grass, and wood smoke. He returned to her. The crowd hushed again, watching. He held out the cloak. "Stay or go, your choice," he said, voice low and rough but clear. "I only opened the door." She glanced at Amos, already stuffing silver into his pockets, eyes averted. She looked at Wade, deadly calm. She looked at the other men, predatory and cruel. Then she looked at Taye. It was the only choice offered all day. She reached out, took the cloak, heavy wool, warm. She wrapped it around her shoulders, shielding her pale dress, hiding herself from their eyes. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Taye nodded once and walked out of the saloon. Lila drew a deep breath, tasting smoke and the open plains. She held her head high, never looking back at her uncle, and followed him into the night. Koa waited patiently, holding the reins of Taye's paint stud and his own pony, along with a third horse, a calm-looking mare. The saloon door slammed behind them, echoing into the night. Wade's voice cut through the darkness. "They won't reach the river. Not with the horses." "You ride?" Taye asked, eyes on Lila. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He gestured toward the mare. "This one is steady," he said. In one fluid motion, he swung onto his paint stud. Koa mounted his pony beside him. Lila struggled with the folds of the heavy wool cloak, finally hoisting herself into the saddle. They moved west, away from the main trail, into the dark, jagged terrain that led toward the Canadian River. The last sod houses faded behind them, their yellow lights swallowed by shadow. Then came the thunder of hooves, at least half a dozen riding hard, leaving the livery to chase them. "Now!" Taye commanded, voice sharp but calm. He kicked his paint stud into a gallop, vanishing instantly into darkness. Lila gripped the reins, the unfamiliar saddle beneath her, the heavy cloak flapping in the wind. She urged the mare forward, heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm, plunging after him into the consuming black. No moon, no stars, only the desperate pounding of hooves on dry, packed earth. Lila clutched the mare's mane as the wool cloak threatened to catch the wind and pull her from the saddle. She rode blindly, trusting the animal beneath her to follow the shapes of Taye ahead on his paint stud, and Koa's shadow beside him. Behind them, the distant shouts from the settlement grew fainter, but the sound of pursuit only grew louder. Wade was a hunter, and he had his pack. Their horses were fresh, riding hard, relentless. "This way." Taye's voice cut through the storm, low and commanding. He veered sharply north, away from the main trails, into broken gullies that led toward the Canadian River. The air changed, thick, humid, smelling of ozone. The electric tang of lightning streaked across the sky. The first massive raindrop hit Lila's cheek, cold as metal. Another followed. Within moments, the sky tore open. This was no gentle rain, but a torrent, a solid wall of water turning red dust into slick, treacherous mud. The temperature plummeted. The world shrank to thunder, rain hammering, and the horses fighting the ground beneath them. "They'll lose our trail in this," Koa yelled, young voice triumphant. "They'll follow the sound," Taye called back. "They know we're headed for the river." The pursuit did not falter. If anything, the storm made them more desperate, knowing the river would rise. They burst from the dry plain onto the riverbank. Not a bank, but a wide expanse of sand and shadow. The Canadian River stretched a mile wide, shallow in places, but tonight, swollen and wild. "Cross now!" Taye yelled over the roar of wind. He spurred his paint stud into the water. The animal plunged in, finding footing and moving steadily. Koa followed. Lila hesitated. The water seemed alive, a dark, monstrous thing. Behind her, a gunshot cracked sharply, swallowed by thunder. Wade's men were close. She kicked the mare. The horse stumbled, panicked, then plunged into the churning current. The river was stronger than she had imagined, tugging at the mare's legs, dragging her downstream. The animal fought for footing against the shifting, rocky bottom. They were halfway across. The water soaked Lila's dress, tugging at her legs. The mare's hind legs slipped, front hooves lashing wildly. Lila lost her grip on the reins, screaming as she slid from the saddle. The wool cloak, heavy as lead, threatened to pull her under into the icy black current. She barely had time to think before a hand, hard as iron, clamped around her arm. Taye was beside her. He had wheeled his paint stud in an impossible turn. Fingers dug into her, pulling her up, but between her weight, the panicked mare, and the slick riverbank beneath his own horse's hooves, He struggled to keep his footing. The paint stud slipped in the mud, sending them both into a desperate fight against the river's pull. Taye held on to her, refusing to let go, and the momentum of their combined weight pulled him from the saddle. They crashed together, not gently, but violently. They tumbled onto the riverbank, a jumble of limbs, wet wool, and cold mud sucking at them. They slid down into a thicket of tall reeds. Lila landed hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Taye was on top of her, weight pressing her into the sodden earth. Rain hammered down, drumming on them both. She gasped, the world spinning, and for a fleeting second she was back in the saloon, trapped and helpless. Then his weight lifted. He rolled off instantly, pushing up on one hand, lungs rasping in the darkness. They were hidden now, the thick reeds shielding them from the river and the trail. The pursuit thundered past 50 yards away, obscured by the downpour. "Here, far side of the river!" A voice roared, distant but fierce. The hooves pounded deeper into the storm. Silence fell around them, broken only by their own breathing and the heavy rain. Lila lay in the mud, shivering, soaked to the bone. Taye was a dark shadow beside her. He had saved her, had fallen with her. She could feel the heat radiating off him, even in the chill. For the first time, desperation and instinct collided. "Can you move?" His voice was low, rough. "I think so," she rasped, trying to sit up. Her body ached, but nothing felt broken. He reached out, hand hovering, not touching but ready. She pushed to her hands and knees, mud cold and gritty beneath her. "The horses," she whispered. "My stud, he won't get far." "He's steady. Koa has yours," Taye said, rising in a crouch, ears attuned. The sound of the pursuers had faded into the storm. Taye whistled low, sharp, like a night bird. Moments later, two shapes emerged. Koa, face pale in the dark, leading the mare, and Taye's paint stud, patient a few yards away. "The storm hides us," Koa said quietly. "We'll find shelter." Taye helped Lila to her feet, steadying her elbow briefly, then letting go. The touch was impersonal, brief, but it sent a strange, cold fire through her. They rode for another hour, moving carefully, letting the horses pick their way through the slick terrain. The storm softened into a cold, steady downpour. Taye found what he sought, a deep overhang, a slice of rock cut from the bluff, almost a shallow cave, sheltered from wind and rain. They dismounted. Taye removed the saddles and hobbled the horses where they could graze on the wet, sparse grass. Koa gathered dry twigs from the deepest part of the shelter. Taye sparked a fragile flame with flint and steel, feeding it stick by stick until it caught, a small circle of orange in the vast, wet darkness. Lila huddled close, teeth chattering, soaked to the skin. The heavy wool cloak dragged her down. She shrugged it off, shivering in her thin, soaked cotton dress. Taye handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "Even wet, it'll hold your heat." She wrapped it around her again, tighter this time, and sat on a dry patch of rock, hands held to the fire. Koa checked the horses, efficient and practiced. Lila watched Taye. He stared into the flames, face hard, firelight catching the wet strands of his dark hair. He had paid a fortune for her, saved her life, and he had not touched her, except to keep her alive. "Why?" she croaked. He did not look up from the fire. "Why what?" "Why, the horses, the silver. It was too much." Finally he turned his head, eyes meeting hers. "I did not do it for you." Lila flinched. His words were blunt, almost cruel. "Pike," Taye continued, flat. "Men like that, they think everything can be owned. Everyone has a price. I do not like what they believe." "But you bought me," she whispered, the shame of the paper, the preacher, returning to her like a shadow. "I am bound to you," Lila said softly. Taye's gaze stayed on the fire. "You are not bound." "You are New Moonu?" she asked. "The people," he said. "That is what we call ourselves. New Moonu among the people." He poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the air. "A man gives gifts for a wife. Horses, blankets. It is not a purchase. It is a promise. It shows honor, shows her family that he can provide, that he will protect her. It is a responsibility." He looked at the paper lying near the flames. "That is a white man's shield. Wade cannot touch you now. The soldiers cannot arrest you. On their paper you are my wife, but you are not mine." His gaze returned to hers, direct, unflinching. "I will not touch you. You sleep where you sleep, eat what I eat. And when you are safe, when you have a place to go, you go. The paper is ash, a lie fighting a lie." Lila's mind reeled, trying to grasp the shape of his words. He was offering her dignity, using the wealth he had, horses his band needed for survival, to buy her choice. Koa returned, sliding through the reeds to settle on the far side of the fire. He tossed a piece of dried venison to Taye, who passed it to Lila. Her fingers were clumsy as she took it. "They will not stop," she whispered. "Taye," Koa said quietly, no longer the boy trying to be brave, but a scout reporting. "I know," Taye said. "It is not just about her?" Lila looked up as Koa continued. "When I waited at the livery, I watched near the saloon window. Wade was talking with Silas's foreman before the auction. They were drinking, and they said Silas has a contract, a water contract." Taye froze. His hand hovered over the fire, stick unmoving. "What water?" he asked, voice soft and deadly. "The Cottonwood Springs," Koa said. "Silas plans to dam the springs and run a pipe. He's going to sell the water to the railroad. He said it's worth $10,000. The stick snapped in Taye's hand. He threw the pieces into the fire, sparks hissing. He strode to the mouth of the shelter, staring into the dark, rainy night. Evelyn saw the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his back. When he spoke, his voice was raw, full of a pain that went far beyond the storm. "When I was a boy, the smallpox came. The white sickness. We had no medicine. Only the springs, the clean water. Still, we lost so many. My mother, my sisters. We raised white flags on the death lodges. The whole valley was white with flags. The only thing that kept the rest of us alive was that water. It is the only clean water on this part of the plains," he said, turning back, his face a mask of cold fury in the firelight. "Silas is not just stealing water. He is stealing our ghosts. He is stealing our future." Lila's own troubles, her fears, seemed small by comparison. She was not the only one fighting for survival. Taye's gaze landed on her, seeing her in a way he hadn't before. Not as a burden, but as something else. "You wanted a school," he stated. "Yes," she whispered. "I have books. I needed a piece of land, a homestead claim, or help from the mission board at Fort Ellison." "Fort Ellison," Taye repeated. "There is a judge there, Judge Boone. They say she is hard, but fair, a widow from the war." He nodded slowly, a plan forming, sharp and clear. "Silas uses paper and steel. We will use paper to stop him." He looked at Lila. "We will go to Fort Ellison. You will file your claim for your school, and I—" His voice dropped. "We will file a claim for the water that belongs to my people." It was a crazy idea, an Indian filing a claim against a white railroad man. But Lila saw the iron certainty in his face. He believed it. The storm had passed. The rain softened to a whisper, and the night held a fragile calm. In the distance, the sharp, barking cry of a coyote echoed off the bluffs. Koa was already asleep, wrapped tight in his blanket. Taye sat by the fire, keeping the first watch. He said nothing about her sleeping, simply tending the flames, rifle resting across his knees, solid and unmovable. Lila pulled the damp wool cloak tighter around her shoulders. It smelled of him, of smoke, horse, and rain. She lay on the dry rock, back against the cave wall, firelight warming her face. Her eyes followed him, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the constant vigilance in his gaze scanning the darkness outside. She was a bought woman, a runaway, cold, wet, hunted, but for the first time since arriving in this unforgiving land, she was not afraid. She closed her eyes, protected by the circle of his fire. She slept. Fort Ellison was no saloon town. Its buildings of gray stone, sober and solid, lined a wide main street cleared of scrub. A two-story courthouse rose at the center, flag snapping cleanly against the pale, storm-washed sky. The air carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber, cold smoke, and the faint, acidic tang of the telegraph office. It was a town where paper mattered more than pistols. The ride had taken 2 hard days, avoiding main trails, pushing the horses hard. Taye had set a relentless pace, stopping only to rest the animals. They were exhausted, but news from the Canadian River had lit a cold fire in him. He had ridden in first, face a mask of determination. Koa rode beside him, eyes wide, taking in the size of the stone buildings. Lila followed, still wrapped in Taye's cloak. She had washed her face at the last camp and braided her hair. She felt the steps under her as they dismounted at the public hitching rail. The people here were not the drunken, leering crowd of her uncle's saloon. Merchants, freighters, and soldiers' wives moved in clean dresses, their eyes sharp, judging. A Comanche warrior, hair braided, followed by a pale, white woman who looked like a captive. The whispers began before the reins were even tied. The courthouse was cool inside, air still, smelling of floor wax, dry paper, and ink. A deputy with a drooping mustache glanced up from his desk, eyes lingering on Taye's knife, then on Lila. "We are here to see Judge Boone," Lila said, her voice small in the high-ceilinged room. The deputy grunted, thumb jerking toward a heavy oak door. "She's in." Judge Boone bent over a ledger, steel nib scratching across the page. Small, practical black dress, worn for years. Her graying hair pulled tight in a bun, skin stretched across her sharp cheekbones. Widow since the war, radiating a chill. Her office was neat, austere, softless. She did not look up immediately. She finished the line, carefully blotted the ink, then raised her pale, faded blue eyes, taking in everything in one sweeping glance. She saw Taye, tall, coiled, and still like a warrior in a room of paper. She saw Lila, exhausted, cotton dress stained from the river, heavy wool cloak clutched around her. She saw Koa, trying to disappear by the door. "I am aware," Judge Boone said, voice crisp, carrying no welcome. The telegraph wire had brought news from Sweetwater Creek that morning, Amos's version, and an hour ago, a rider delivered a petition from Silas's attorney. Claims of kidnapping, coercion, theft of property. "The property, I assume, being you, young woman," Taye said, voice low, absorbing the small sounds of the room. "There was no kidnapping," Judge Boone replied, tapping a document on her desk. Lila recognized Reverend Holt's sloppy stamp. "A temporary marriage contract, filed by Circuit Preacher Holt, highly irregular. And, given Amos was settling a gambling debt to Silas, highly suspect," she continued, fixing her gaze on Lila. Silas's lawyer is demanding annulment on grounds of coercion. He claims you were forced into this arrangement, Judge Boone said, leaning forward. Were you coerced, young woman? You are in a court of law now. You are safe here, she heard her voice whisper. Tell me the truth. Were you forced? This was the moment. Lila felt Taye's presence beside her, but he remained silent, eyes fixed ahead. He was giving her the choice. Just as he had in the saloon, she could say yes. She could claim coercion. The paper would be torn up. Freedom, in name at least. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Being a ward of the court, being sent back east, or worse, held until Amos or Silas found another way to claim her. It was no freedom at all. She lifted her chin. Your Honor, my uncle put me in a situation where I had no choice. He intended to sell me to the highest bidder. That was coercion. And Mr. Taye? Judge Boone pressed. Mr. Taye, Lila said, voice gaining strength, paid my uncle's debt. He offered me protection. She drew a deep breath. I signed that paper of my own free will. It was the only choice I had, and I made it. Taye had seen fear in her eyes, but this girl was neither timid nor broken. She was telling a careful, measured truth. You claim this contract is valid? The judge asked. I am, Lila said firmly. Judge Boone tapped the petition from Silas's lawyer. Then the claim of coercion is a civil dispute, not a criminal one. The contract, as irregular as it is, stands for now. She folded her hands. That settles the lawyer's complaint. It does not settle what you are here to do. What is your purpose? I have a claim, Taye said, stepping forward. Judge Boone's eyebrows shot up. She had not expected that. A land claim? A water claim? She asked. The Cottonwood Springs, Taye said. It belongs to the New Munu, my people. Silas is moving men to dam the springs. He's stealing our water to sell to the railroad. Judge Boone sighed, a long, weary sound. Her gaze shifted from Taye to Lila, and back again. Tribal water rights are almost impossible to enforce, she said, unless there's a federally ratified treaty explicitly outlining these springs. We have one, Taye said. The Treaty of 1867. It promised the Valley of the Cottonwood to my people. The document is at the agency in Fort Sill. The judge went still. A treaty, not just custom. She tapped her pen on the desk. That changes the legal framework. But Silas has possession. He's building now. A treaty injunction could take months. And by then, the dam will be finished, the water diverted, and the case lost. She turned her sharp eyes to Lila. And you, Miss Hart? Or is it Mrs. Ngumu? Lila felt a flush creep up her neck, but ignored it. I am here to file a claim for a school, Your Honor. A homestead claim near the old Mission Cross, for the purpose of establishing a school for the children of this territory. For the first time, the judge's expression softened, just a fraction. A school, she said, nodding once. That at least is a claim I can process immediately. Very well. But you have made powerful enemies. That paper, she motioned toward the marriage contract, is the only legal defense you have. Judge Boone did not like Silas, but he was a man of power. He controlled the territorial sheriff. Be careful. Outside, the courthouse sun beat down. The town felt hostile. We need supplies, Taye said. Powder, lead. He led them away from the main street, toward the smithy at the edge of town. The steady ring of hammer on anvil was comforting, solid. The blacksmith, a large man named Hank, greeted Taye warmly, his sun-darkened face kind, arms thick with muscle. He offered a forearm grip in respect that spoke of long acquaintance. Hank looked at Lila and Koa, then nodded. Your arrival makes loud news. Taye, he said in careful English, a soft accent threading his words. He dipped a cup from his well and offered it to Lila. She drank gratefully. "Judge Boone is a good woman," Hank said, turning back to his forge, "but she is only one. Silas is a snake with many rattles. He's hired the Triangle Spur outfit to guard his construction. They're not cowboys." "We know Wade," Taye said flatly. "They are moving fast," Hank warned, handing Taye a heavy canvas bag. "Bullets, 30-30, and some for the Spencer." "A gift," he said. "We will pay," Taye replied. "No," Hank said grimly. "Silas is trying to choke us all. He chokes your water, chokes my freight prices. You must be careful. They know you are here. They will not wait for the judge's paper." They found stalls for the horses at the livery. The nervous owner took Taye's coin and vanished. Hotels were too expensive, and Taye would not sleep indoors. The hayloft was clean, dry, defensible. As Taye and Koa tended the exhausted horses, Lila sat in the loft, the smell of hay and leather oddly comforting. She watched Taye moving below, precise, economical, checking the horses' legs. Outside, whispers drifted in from the street, the same hushed judgment from earlier. The way the women looked at her. A white woman saved by a Comanche. She had preserved her safety, but at what cost to his honor? When he climbed the ladder, face thoughtful, he paused. Lila held the contract from her pocket. "This paper," she said, "it is a lie, and a lie that hurts you." He watched her, expression unreadable. "You told me," his voice low but intense, "about the gifts, the honor. What will your people think? That you traded fine horses my band needs for me, a white woman. They will say you were fooled. They will say you shamed yourself." Taye was still. So focused on the water, on Silas, he had not allowed himself to consider this. Returning to his band, he imagined the elders' faces, disappointment shadowing them. "When your water is safe," Lila said, pushing the words out, "we must go back to the judge. We must tell her the truth, that it was a defense. We must annul it." He looked away, past her, out the loft door at the town settling into evening. A man stood across the street, watching the livery, one of Silas's men. Pride and the new moon-you honor stung at her words. She was right, but duty and promise weighed heavier. He turned back to her. Face pale, serious, she was trying to protect him. "You are not safe," he said, harsh. "Silas will not stop. The paper holds until you are safe." "My honor," she began. Taye cut her off, sharply, voice edged with anger she did not understand. "Is my own. It is not yours to worry about." He turned, sharp, clear, and walked to the far side of the loft, staring into the dusk. Angry that she was right, angry at the cold spike of fear her words stirred. "We must annul it." Night fell completely. Koa made a small, cold camp in the loft. They ate dried venison and hardtack. The boy fell asleep quickly, wrapped in his blanket. Lila sat back against a bale of hay, tension thick between her and Taye. A heavy, uneasy silence. Taye took the first watch, standing at the open loft door, rifle in hand, silhouette against the starry sky. Hours passed. Lila dozed, but did not truly sleep. A sound woke her. A boot scraping the gravel outside. Not the town drunk. A measured, careful approach. She sat up. "Taye," she whispered. The doorway was empty. Below, in the stable, one of the horses nickered, a low, nervous sound. Lila crawled to the edge of the loft, peering through gaps in the floorboards. Dim lantern light revealed Taye below, standing by his paint stud, head tilted, listening. Then she saw the shadow detach itself from the darker corners near the tack room. A man moving with predator's silence. Wade. He held a long knife, its blade catching a glint of moonlight. He was not here for the horses. He was here to stop the claim before it began. Lila's breath caught. She opened her mouth to scream. Wade lunged. Taye spun, not toward Wade, but away, rolling behind the horse. The paint stud screamed, lashing out with hind legs, smashing the stall door. Wade leapt back, separated from his target. "Coward!" Wade hissed, hiding behind the horse. "Taye!" Lila screamed. Koa was instantly awake, rifle in hand. Taye used the chaos. He burst from the other side of the stall, knife in hand, moving faster than the gunman could react. This was not a gunfight. It was a fight of raw, brutal strength. Wade was strong. He dropped his knife, grabbed Taye's wrist, and slammed him back against a support beam. The wood cracked. Taye grunted, driving his knee into Wade's thigh. Wade roared, swinging a fist onto Taye's shoulder. Locked together, straining, a duel of sheer force. Wade freed his arm and landed a sharp punch to Taye's ribs. Taye staggered. Wade drew a second, smaller knife from his boot. He lunged. Taye twisted, but the blade was fast, slicing across his forearm, a hot, searing line of pain. "No!" Lila cried, desperate, scanning for anything. She grabbed a heavy wooden feed bucket and hurled it down. It struck Wade's shoulder. He cursed, looking up. The brief distraction was all Taye needed. Ignoring the pain in his arm, he drove forward, slamming his head into Wade's face. A sharp crack of bone. Wade bellowed, stumbling back, clutching his nose. Taye did not follow. Breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm onto the hay, Taye watched Wade retreat. Black hatred burned in the man's eyes. He saw Koa in the loft, rifle leveled. Wade spat blood. "This isn't over." Then he vanished, a shadow slipping out the back door. The stable rang with the panic of horses. Lila scrambled down the ladder. Taye leaned against a beam, pale. "Blood is running from your arm," she said, voice shaking. "Little Fox, the waterskin, bring the lantern," Taye said through gritted teeth. "It's nothing." "Sit," Lila commanded, pushing at his uninjured shoulder. To her surprise, he dropped heavily onto a feed sack. She tore a long, clean strip from her petticoat. Hands shaking, mind cold and focused, she poured water over the gash, washing away horsehair and dirt. Taye hissed. His body tensed, but he did not pull away. She wrapped the cloth tightly, pressing hard against his skin. It was warm. Alive. Taye's voice came ragged and quiet. "I wasn't watching my back." "You're alive," Lila said, tying the knot. Her fingers brushed his skin. He would try again, she realized. Taye glanced at the white bandage on his dark arm. "You're not afraid of blood," she said, voice small. "My mother was sick for a long time," he replied. I learned to do what needs to be done. It's better than screaming." He nodded, eyes dropping to the floor, dark splashes of blood soaking into the hay. "My grandmother," he said so quietly Lila had to lean in to hear, "taught me to keep the fire. Before I could hunt, before I could ride into war, I learned to keep the cold safe, to wrap it in dry moss and carry it," Lila said softly. "Fire is life, harder to protect than to make." Taye looked up at her, dark eyes sharp. "You kept the fire tonight." Before she could speak, or even grasp the weight of his words, there was a desperate commotion at the stable's front door. It wasn't Wade. A boy, a new Moo boy, fell into the stable, caked in mud, his pony collapsed at the rail. He had ridden from the valley without pause. "Taye!" he gasped, scrambling to his feet. Taye was instantly on alert, arm throbbing, wound forgotten. "What is it?" Taye demanded. "They're here," the boy said, voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "Silas's men. They came this morning. Wagons, 20, maybe 30 men with rifles. They're blocking the path to the springs. They won't let the band near the water." Taye's face went blank. And they have axes, the boy choked out. They're cutting the cottonwoods. They've started building a dam. The news hit Taye like another blow from Wade's fist. Cottonwoods cut, springs dammed. Too late. The cold fury from the night before solidified in his chest. His arm throbbed, dull fire burning through him. He ignored it. They were moving too fast. The judge's paper is too slow, Taye said, voice flat and hard. The water will be dead before her court order arrives. What do we do? Lila asked quietly, her tone steady, eyes calm, watching him. We ride, Taye said. He turned to the young rider, gulping water that Hank had brought. Rest, eat, tell no one we've left. He looked at Koa. Saddle the paint in the mirror. The boy's pony is spent. We take Hank's mule for supplies. We? Lila asked. Taye met her gaze. Silas's men are at the springs. Wade is there. This town is a trap. You are not safe here. I am not a warrior. I'll slow you down, she said, chin lifted. You have paper. Taye touched the pocket holding her homestead application and the marriage contract. Judge Boone respects paper. My band has a treaty, but it's at Fort Sill. Your claim is here. You're the only paper that can stop him. A new understanding passed between them. It was no longer just his water or her school. The two claims were one. I'll need to write, Lila said, mind racing. Document what we see. The number of men, the tools, the destruction of the trees. An affidavit. Judge Boone will need proof. Good, Taye said. You will be our memory. You will be the tongue for the paper. She reached into her saddlebags, brought by Hank from the livery, and pulled out a small, leather-bound book and pencil. I can map the trail, draw what they are building, track supply lines, how they feed that many men. That's what my father taught me. Logistics. A school needs supply lines. 2. Taye nodded, new respect dawning. She was not a burden. She was a different kind of weapon. He turned to Koa. You will be my eyes. I will be the teeth. And she, he gestured to Lila, will be the voice that speaks to the judge. Hank pressed a final bag into Taye's hand. This isn't just bullets. It's blasting powder from the new mine, enough to move rocks or a bad dam. Taye looked at the blacksmith. You are a good friend, Hank. Go with God. Hank made a quick sign. Ride like the devil. They slipped out the back of the smithy, melting into the alleyways. They were on the trail before the town had fully stirred, riding not towards the main pass, but into the high, broken country to the north. Taye knew the path well. A narrow goat track, used by his people for generations, invisible from the valley below. They rode hard for 2 days, wind whipping grit into their faces, the landscape growing steeper, harsher. Stone and sky dominated everything. Taye's arm throbbed constantly, but he did not slow. On the 3rd morning they reached the pass, a narrow split in the rock, barely wide enough for one horse. The wind screamed through it. Taye dismounted. We walk from here. The wind helps, hides our sound, but it can betray us too. He pointed. Lila's eyes followed, strung between 2 low bushes, almost invisible, a thin wire with 3 small copper bells, tripwires. Wade's men, Taye said. They guard the pass. Lila's stomach dropped. So we cannot get through, she said. We get through, Taye replied, looking at Koa. You take the horses, go back half a mile, find cover. If we're not back by sundown, ride to the band. Tell them to fight. Koa's face went pale, terror written on every line. He nodded. I will wait, he said. No, Lila said. He shouldn't wait. It's too dangerous. He will wait, Taye said, turning to her. The pass is a mile long, narrow, loose rocks. Your skirts will catch. You cannot do this alone. I will, she began. He will carry you, Koa whispered quietly. Lila stared first at him, then at Taye. Your arm. You're wounded. My legs are strong, he said. It's the only way. We must be silent, and we must be fast. He knelt back to her. Climb on. Hold tight. Make no sound. Her body pressed against him, a closeness she hadn't imagined, but she saw the determination in his face. The glint of the copper bells in the pale light reminded her of the danger. She hiked her skirts and swung onto his back. He grunted at the added weight, his wounded arms straining, her arms looped around his neck, face pressed to his shoulder. He smelled of sweat, dust, and the faint metallic tang of blood from his bandage. He rose, moving silently into the pass, moccasins soundless on stone. Lila held her breath, every step measured, every rock carefully chosen. He shifted her weight to favor his good arm, body tensed with effort. The wind screamed around them, drowning their breathing, hiding the pounding of her heart. He stepped over the first wire, ducked under a low overhang. Lila felt the muscles in his back, solid as old wood, straining beneath her. She was utterly dependent, her life in his hands. Halfway through, a rock slipped. Taye grunted, catching himself on his wounded arm. A sharp hiss of pain escaped him. Lila felt the tremor of agony ripple through him, but he did not fall. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm too heavy, she murmured. Be still, he commanded, voice a tight rasp. He paused, catching his harsh breaths, then pressed on. An hour passed, an hour of her clinging, of him carrying her weight, step by silent step. At last they reached the far side. He almost collapsed as he set her on a flat ledge, leaning heavily against the rock wall. Sweat beaded his face, gray with pain. His arm bled again, a fresh, dark stain spreading over the white bandage. You're hurt, Lila said, voice trembling with guilt and a fierce, sudden protectiveness. She scrambled to her saddlebag, slung over Taye's shoulder, and pulled out the water skin and a fresh strip of cloth. It's nothing, he said, voice weak. Be still, she echoed, repeating his own command. She unwrapped the bloodied bandage. The wound was raw, angry, red. She poured precious water over it, cleaning it as gently as she could. He watched her, dark eyes shadowed with pain. You should have left me, she said, voice thick. I slowed you down. I am a burden. Taye was quiet, watching her fingers knot the new strip of cloth. When you spoke, he said finally, low, in the stable, about the paper, about my honor. Her eyes met his. You were right, he said. My people wouldn't understand. I traded our horses for a white woman. They would see weakness. That's why we must annul it. She whispered, when this is over, to restore your name. He looked away, out over the valley. They were high enough now to see the springs, a dark patch of green, miles distant. The smoke of Silas's camp rose faintly in the distance. When you said that, he said, voice tight, I was angry. Not because you were right, but because the thought of ending it, leaving you, I couldn't find the words. He had never spoken like this before. Lila stared, wind whipping her hair across her face. You did not want me to go, she whispered. I told you I bought protection, he said, looking back at her, eyes intense. A lie, half a truth. I bought you to stop Silas. I bought you because what they were doing was wrong. But when you followed me out, rode through the storm, I did not want to let you go. He looked down at his bandaged arm. And now, I cannot. Her heart stopped, then started again, heavy, painful. She began. I am so afraid, not of Wade, not of Silas. I'm afraid of being owned, of being a thing, a piece of property, Like that night, my whole life, I have been collateral for someone else's debts." "You are not property," he said, voice fierce. He reached out, his good hand brushing her cheek. The lightest touch, yet it burned like a brand. "You are not a debt." They stayed frozen, high on the mountain pass, wind howling their secrets away. Slowly, they moved on, descending into the hidden valley of the Cottonwood Springs. Taye found a small, sheltered hollow, a pocket of silence away from the wind, where a few ancient cottonwoods had escaped the axe. In the distance, they could hear the brutal rhythm of axes and the faint shouts of men. They were too close. Taye built a tiny, smokeless fire, using dry wood from a hollow log. It was a risk, but they were freezing, and he needed to heat some broth. His exertion and wound had left him weak. They sat side by side, sharing a blanket. Lila held a tin cup of hot broth to his lips. He drank, eyes on her, firelight flickering across the exhaustion and pain on his face. His good hand rested on his knee, inches from hers. Lila looked at it, strong, calloused, trembling from cold, from pain, from the confessions spoken on the mountain. She saw the scar on his knuckle, white against dark skin. Without thinking, moved by an impulse she did not understand, she reached out. Fingers brushing over the scar. His hand stopped trembling. He went utterly still, turned his palm up, and slid his fingers between hers, lacing them together. Taye's hand was rough, but burning hot. He didn't speak, just stared at her, breath harsh in the quiet of the hollow. Lila saw it then, the fire in his eyes. The same intensity he used to scan the horizon now fixed entirely on her. It was hunger, fear, and a deep, aching desire. Nothing to do with ownership. "Evelyn," he whispered, voice thick. He leaned closer. She didn't flinch. She leaned toward him. "I promised I wouldn't touch you," he breathed, lips inches from hers. "I'm not afraid," she whispered back. "Until you say stop," he vowed, voice low, rough. "I will stop," he said. "Do not stop," she murmured. He kissed her. Not gentle. Deep, desperate, raw. The wind, the river, the fear, the fire, they poured into the kiss. Words they could not speak. It was a claim, but not of possession. It was a claim of shared fate. He held her close, wrapping his good arm around her, pressing her to his side, shielding her from the cold, from the world. Foreheads together, breaths ragged. The sound of axes faded into nothing. Only the fire, their hearts, and the promise remained. He kissed her again, slower this time, deep and exploring. When she shivered, he drew the blanket tighter around them both. The small fire burned low. When Lila woke, the sun was just touching the highest peaks. She was alone under the blanket. Panic rose. He was gone. But then she saw him standing at the edge of the hollow, watching the valley below. Near the dead fire, he had built a small stone pyramid, 4 flat gray stones stacked like a permanent marker. She stepped beside him. He did not look at her, but the space between them had changed. "Good morning," she said quietly. He nodded, a faint smile brushing his lips. "Good morning, Evelyn." She looked down at the valley. Silas's camp was fully visible now. A dam. A fortress under construction. "We cannot stop that," she said, heart sinking. "Not just the 2 of us." "No," Taye agreed. "Breaking tools won't be enough. They'll just bring more." "What about that main tent?" she asked, pointing to the largest one, set apart with 2 guards. "That's where Wade is," Taye said, "and where Silas visits." Koa appeared, sliding silently from the rocks above. He had been scouting. "I got close," he whispered, eyes bright with adrenaline. "I heard them. Wade was shouting at a man in a suit." "He moved a metal lockbox into the tent," Koa continued. "All the contracts, all the bribe lists." Taye and Lila exchanged a look. "That's it," Lila said, voice electric. "The proof, the forged contracts, the list of who Silas has paid. If we can get that box to Judge Boone, she can send the marshals." "We can stop him with his own law," Taye finished. The plan shifted. Harder, more dangerous. No longer just sabotage. It was theft. "We get that box tonight," Taye said, scanning the camp. Face set. Planning. Lila watched, fierce pride swelling in her chest. A sharp crack echoed up the canyon. A rifle shot. Not a hunting shot. A signal. Taye pulled her back behind the rocks. Koa dropped flat. A shout came from below, the camp pointing toward their position. Then a second shot rang out, from the pass behind them, the very one they had just crossed. The bullet ricocheted off the rock, inches from Taye's head, sending shards of stone flying. Hale's voice thundered down the pass. "Impossible! They're pinned right where I wanted them!" Taye grabbed Lila, pulling her low into the hollow. Stone chips sprayed around them like stinging hail. Koa flattened against the rock beside them, heart hammering. Hale's triumphant, cruel shout echoed from the ridge above. "Right where I want you, pinned like rabbits in a snare!" A second volley erupted, from the camp below. Pike's men, alerted by the signal shot, were firing uphill, forcing them into a deadly crossfire. The high goat track had become a shooting gallery, and they were the targets. Taye spat, fury thick in his throat. He had seen the trip wires, but not the flankers hidden among the rocks above the pass. "Give up the woman, Taye," Hale bellowed, closer now. "Pike wants his collateral, and he wants those studs you stole, and I might let the boy live." Bullets kicked up dust, smashing into the rocks around their tiny shelter. Escape seemed impossible. Suddenly, gunfire from below intensified, a heavy covering volley. Lila felt her heart seize. 3 men scrambled up the rocks from the left, using the steep slope as cover, flanking them. Taye spun, rifle raised. He fired once, a scream, a body tumbling down the scree, but the other 2 were too close. They burst into the hollow. Taye was on them, knife in his good hand. One man, massive, a freighter, ignored Taye entirely, lunging for Lila. She screamed as his grimy, powerful hand clamped onto her arm, hauling her to her knees in the open. Another man, thin and cruel-faced, bound her hands with rough rope. Hale appeared on the ridge above, not 50 yards away. Rifle trained on Taye's chest, face swollen and bruised, nose a dark ruin from Taye's earlier strike. "Well," Hale said, his soft venomous drawl cutting through the morning air. "This simplifies things. Throw down your rifle, Taye, or I gut her right here." Taye froze. His eyes met Lila's. Her face was pale, terror etched deep, but she did not cry. "Do it," she whispered, strained. "Do not let him kill you," Hale barked, eyes locked on Taye. Slowly, Taye placed his rifle on the ground. "Let her go. All of it," Hale commanded. "Knife, rifle, kick them over here." Taye unbuckled his knife belt. Koa, pale and sick, added his rifle to the pile. Taye kicked the weapons toward Hale. "Good," Hale said, a cold smile twisting his battered face. "Now the horse. Pike wants his stud. Whistle." Taye stood, hands empty, exposed. He looked at Lila, then at Hale, and pressed his fingers to his lips, letting out the low, sharp whistle he used to call his paint. Hale and his men turned toward the pass, eyes narrowing. Expecting the horses to appear, Taye noted the wind, strong and cutting from the hollow, funneling straight up the pass toward Hale. "He's coming," Taye muttered under his breath. Hale's eyes, along with the man gripping Lila, were fixed on the pass, but Taye moved. It wasn't a rush. It was a controlled, fluid motion. His hand dipped to the small, smoldering fire. He pulled the leather pouch from his belt, the dried chilies rattling inside. "What is he doing?" the thin man hissed. Taye tossed the pouch onto the coals. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the dry leather and brittle peppers ignited. Thick, pungent smoke erupted, yellow-brown and choking. It wasn't wood smoke. It was a blinding, weaponized cloud of capsaicin, caught by the wind and funneled directly up the slope. The effect was immediate. The men on the ridge screamed, not in pain, but in raw agony. They clawed at their faces. "My eyes! My eyes!" Hale roared, tears streaming, vision dissolving. He fired blindly. The shot went wild. The man holding Lila cursed, face twisting, eyes shut tight, but his grip on her didn't loosen. "Now, Koa!" Taye bellowed. The boy dove, not for a rifle, but toward Hale. Taye grabbed a heavy piece of firewood, makeshift club in hand, disappearing into the choking smoke, moving down the slick, muddy slope toward the dam, toward the main camp. Hale coughed and spat, stumbling after him, focused solely on Taye. Above, Koa had grabbed his rifle. He fired at the remaining triangle spurmen, sporadically shooting from the ridge. Lila stayed on her knees, temporarily shielded by the smoke. Taye gasped. "Stay put!" Her hands were bound, but her teeth were free. Instinct and fury took over. She lunged and bit down hard on the man's hand, holding her. He shrieked, a high-pitched, sharp scream, and released her. He raised his fist to strike, but she was already moving, crawling toward a pile of construction supplies. Her eyes locked on a heavy iron saddle hook. Grabbing it, the cold metal felt solid and terrible in her hands. The man, bloodied and screaming, turned to face her. "You little—" She swung the hook in a desperate two-handed arc. It connected with his knee with a wet, sickening crunch. He collapsed, clutching his shattered leg. A second man, emerging from the smoke, raised his rifle, aiming straight at Lila. She froze, hook still in hand. Her life seemed over. A single rifle crack rang from the ridge above. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and he toppled backward. "Koa!" Lila gasped. "The horses! They're here!" Koa thundered down the slope on his pony, leading Taye's paint and her mare. He swooped past the man she had crippled, face grim, war-hardened. "Grab on!" he yelled, extending his arm. Lila, hands still tied, seized his forearm. He hauled her up, half carrying her, shielding her with his body as bullets from the camp below whined past. Down at the springs, the fight continued, raw and primal, but they were moving. Taye faced Hale on the slick, half-built dam. The mud sucked at his boots, treacherous beneath him, and the water, his water, was already pooling behind the wall of felled cottonwoods. Hale's dark eyes glinted, red-rimmed and streaming, his knife low and ready. "You should have stayed in town, Comanche," Hale spat. Taye gripped his firewood club, every muscle tense, adrenaline coursing like ice through his veins, ignoring the fire in his wounded arm. "The water isn't yours," Hale lunged. Taye swung the club, catching Hale's knife arm. The impact sent the blade flying, but Hale's weight bore down, crashing into Taye, dragging them both into the sucking mud. They rolled, fists and fingers clawing, biting pure, brutal chaos. Hale's bulk pressed down, fists like iron. He drove a knee into Taye's chest, hands clamping around his throat. Taye's vision grayed, air ripped from his lungs. He was trapped. With a last desperate surge, Taye hooked his leg around Hale's, twisting in the mud. Hale toppled, the grip loosening. Taye squirmed free, gasping. Hale charged again, bare-handed, a bull ready to gore. Taye ducked, grabbing Hale's arm mid-pass, spinning him with his own momentum. Hale slammed face first into the hard-packed clay of the dam. A sickening thud. Hale lay still. Taye's chest heaved, ragged breaths ripping through him. He hadn't killed Hale. He'd simply ended the threat. Thunder of hooves reached him. Evelyn's scream cut through the chaos. "Taye!" He turned, grim and exhausted, a smile brushing his lips. Lila rode with Koa, safe, weaving between the freed horses. He looked to the dam, scarred and ugly, then felt a deeper rumble beneath his feet. A low, muffled boom rolled up the slope. The earth erupted. Mud, rock, water. Severo's blasting powder, set while they took the long route, had gone off. The dam groaned under the pressure, holding for a tense, groaning moment. Then, with a roar like the land itself tearing open, it gave way. The water of Cottonwood Springs, the lifeblood of his people, exploded free. Not a flood, but an avalanche of roaring, living water. Brown, furious, surging. 10 feet high, it smashed into Pike's camp with the force of a locomotive. Tents, wagons, tools, the fallen cottonwoods, all obliterated in a single cleansing wave. Pike's men who weren't swept away scrambled in terror for high ground, their fortress gone, their illegal work destroyed by the very thing they'd tried to cage. Taye watched the water, chest heaving. Lila slid from her horse, hand still bound, running toward him. He turned, the smile still there, watching the freed water. "It's free," he said. But then she saw him. Pale, ghostly under the sun, not just muddy. He looked down at his left shoulder. A dark, spreading stain soaked through his shirt. Bullet or knife from Hale, he didn't know. Near the collarbone. A bad wound. He swayed, eyes on the river, then on her. "Evelyn," he whispered, collapsing into the mud. "No!" she screamed, a sound torn from her soul. She ran, sliding and falling, catching herself to reach him, cradling his head in her lap. "Koa! The bandages! Get the bandages!" Taye breathed, faint and shallow. Eyes closed. Lila fumbled with her bound hands, cutting the ropes as Koa rushed to help. Taye's face was a mask of agony and exhaustion. Lila slashed the ropes binding her wrists with Hale's discarded knife and leaned over him, ripping open his shirt. The bullet hole was small, dark, bleeding steadily, a relentless pulse. She pressed her hands to it, trying to stop the flow, trying to give him a piece of her own life. "Stay with me," she commanded, voice breaking, raw with terror and determination. "You cannot leave me. Do you hear me? I will not let you go." She looked into his face, so still, the lines of pain smoothed by unconsciousness. The fear she felt was a cold, endless ocean, a hollow terror unlike anything she'd ever known. It wasn't the fear of being captive. It was the terror of losing him. Her hands, soaked in his warm blood, worked furiously. Around them, the river roared, the world a backdrop of chaos. The paper, the contract, the shame, the honor, all of it became meaningless noise. This man, his life, was now hers to protect. She loved him. The realization hit like a thunderclap, as violent and liberating as the water bursting from its dam. "Stay," she whispered, tears streaking the mud on her face. "I chose you, Taye. You do not get to leave." Hale groaned from the mud, stirring weakly. Koa, face grim, stepped forward. He snatched up Hale's pistol, checked it, then used the same rope that had bound Lila to tie Hale's hands tight. "He's finished," the boy said flatly. Lila's mind, sharp with adrenaline, remembered. The lockbox. Her hands red with Taye's blood, she moved to the fallen gunman. She rifled through his vest and pockets, and there it was, a small, heavy iron key, tucked under his shirt, dangling on a chain. She breathed, holding it up. "Koa!" We have the key. A low rumble rolled across the valley, not the river this time. Thunder. Dark, bruised clouds swallowed the sun. Taye's eyes flickered open, focusing on her. Lila? I'm here, she said thickly, voice heavy with relief. The water is free, and we have the key. A tiny, pained nod from Taye. Koa stiffened suddenly, staring north, not at the camp, but toward the high, distant ridge marking the far side of the valley. Taye, he said, voice breaking, soft with awe. Look, on the highest peak. Fires! Signal fires! Taye turned slowly, every movement deliberate, eyes narrowing. He saw it. They see it, he whispered, a faint smile brushing his lips. The band. They see the water. It has returned. Thunder rolled again, deep and resonant, and the first clean drops of rain struck Taye's face. The ride back to Fort Ellison was a blur. Hank had met them near the pass, as planned. Taye's face was grim, taking in the scene. Hale conscious but bound, the water roaring free, and the scarred, torn dam behind them. A small buckboard wagon was hidden in a ravine. They loaded Taye into the back, Lila climbing in beside him, pressing her hands tightly against the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, trying to stem the bleeding that pulsed with every jolt of the wagon. Koa and Hank drove the horses hard, while Hale, bound and sullen, was tied to the wagon axle, stumbling through the thickening mud. The storm intensified, a cold, driving curtain that turned the world gray. Taye's breathing was shallow and ragged. Lila tore more strips from her petticoat, packing the wound, her mind hard and focused. Fear locked away. Hours later, they reached Fort Ellison, ghostly under the midnight sky. They bypassed the courthouse, slipping into the shadows behind Hank's smithy, the wagon sliding into the darkness of the forge. We need a doctor, Lila said, voice trembling as Hank brought a lantern. Taye's face was pale, almost waxy. No, Hank said firmly. The doctor reports gunshots. The sheriff works for Pike. He'd arrest Taye, or Pike's men would kill him in his cell. We do this ourselves. Hank heated his smallest branding iron until it glowed cherry red. Taye's eyes fluttered open as the smith approached, voice gentle. This will hurt, Hank said. Taye nodded once, glancing at Lila. Don't look, she told herself. But she did. Lila held Taye's good hand, squeezing it with all the strength she had as Hank pressed the glowing iron to the bleeding wound. Taye did not scream. His body went rigid, bowstring tense, a low groan tearing from his chest. The acrid scent of seared flesh filled the forge. He slumped back, unconscious, but the bleeding had stopped. The box, Hank said grimly. Taye's voice rasped, dry and weak. It's not here. He'd lost his breath entirely. Hale had moved it back to town. Lila's hand was still sticky with his blood, trembling as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, heavy key. I have this, she said. From Hale. Hank nodded. The office behind the mercantile. The records warehouse. All of Pike's papers, Taye whispered, trying to sit up. A wave of dizziness and pain washed over him, dragging him back down. You will not, Lila commanded. She stood, legs shaking, voice iron. You stay. You live. Koa and I will go. No, it's locked, guarded, Hank warned. You don't know the town. I'll go. Koa, stand guard, Taye said. Lila, you watch me and him. He jerked toward Hale, bound at the anvil. I am going, she said, her jaw set. I'm the only one who knows what to look for. The forged contracts, the bribe lists. I am his wife. It is my right. Hank looked at her, the blood on her dress, the fire in her eyes. He nodded. Then we go together. Rain hammered down, turning the streets into rivers of mud. They moved like ghosts, sticking to the shadows and alleyways. The records office was a squat brick building behind the main Pike Mercantile. Dark, silent. A single heavy lock barred the door. Lila slid the key into it. Her hand shook violently, barely able to turn it. Hank placed his hand over hers, steadying the motion. The tumblers clicked, a sound like a gunshot in the night, and the door swung open. The air was dry, still, smelling of old paper, ink, and faintly of mice. Hank lit a tiny shielded lantern, revealing rows of shelves stretching into the darkness, stacked with ledgers and boxes. "That'll be the metal box," Lila whispered. The one from the tent. She spotted it on a large desk at the far end of the room, bigger than she remembered. She tried the key. It fit. She turned it. The heavy lid creaked open. Ledgers. Bundles of paper tied with ribbon. Maps. "Hurry," Hank urged, keeping a watchful eye on the street through the grimy window. Lila's fingers flew. Not just a teacher. She was an accountant's daughter. She could read paper like a map of the land itself. She found a map of Cottonwood Springs, a red line marking a proposed pipeline to the railroad. She found a thick document labeled Comanche Treaty Addendum, granting water rights. The signatures were crude forgeries. Names of elders she knew from Taye's band were absent, replaced by marks. The price, $50 and 10 sacks of rotten flour. She dug deeper. A small black ledger. She opened it. Her blood ran cold. Names and numbers. Sheriff Brody, Fort Ellison, $100. Oversight. Indian Agent Miles, Fort Sill, $200. Treaty access, every bribe, every forged contract. "I have it," she breathed. A calm, amused voice came from the doorway. "I thought I might find rats in my records." Lila spun, heart hammering. Silas Pike stood there, perfectly dry, expensive suit untouched by the storm, lantern in hand, eyes cold and calculating. Behind him 2 uniformed soldiers stood, rifles ready, eyes cold and calculating. Not deputies, real federal men. "Mr. Pike!" Hank lunged forward, but one soldier swung the rifle butt into the smith's stomach. Hank folded, wind knocked from him, gasping. Pike's smile was slow, predatory. "Stealing again, Miss Hart? That's a federal offense." "And you, Hank," he sneered, eyes sweeping past them into the smithy where Taye was pushing himself towards the doorway. Pike's grin widened, cruel and calm. "The husband, come to guard his property," Pike said. One soldier stepped forward, rifle aimed, intent clear. Before Taye could even lift his weapon, the soldier slammed the stock into his wounded left shoulder. A raw, broken cry tore from Taye's chest as he dropped to his knees. The rifle clattered across the stone floor. "Taye!" Lila screamed, running to him. "Don't move!" Pike's soldiers were steady. One on Lila, one on Hank. Pike stepped over Taye's sprawled form like he was nothing more than a bundle of rags. A polished boot nudged Taye's leg. "You should have died out there in the hills." "Comanche," Pike spat. "You've cost me a fortune. My dam, my best foreman. All for what? A patch of mud?" He leaned down, taking in Taye's pained, contorted face. Pure contempt radiated from him. "You really think your red skin grants you any claim to this land? This land belongs to men who build, men with vision. You are a man. That is quite enough." A whip-crack voice cut through the room. Judge Boone stood in the doorway, rain streaming down her coat. Lantern in hand, her deputy at her side. Behind them, Koa's young face was set, eyes hard. Pike spun, his polite veneer crumbling, replaced by a mask of outrage. "Judge, thank God I caught these thieves red-handed. Breaking into my private office, I was notified." Judge Boone's voice was ice. "Of a disturbance, and I have reason to believe, Mr. Pike, that this office contains stolen property, government land, water rights, obtained by fraud." Pike laughed. A short, barking sound. "You have no proof, only the word of a savage and his runaway whore." "We have a witness," Judge Boone said, nodding to the deputy, who pushed forward a small, drenched figure. It was Running Wolf, the new young rider, face streaked with tears and rain, hands bound. Taye stared at him. Running Wolf could not meet his eyes, staring at the floor, trembling. "I told them, Taye," he whispered, voice broken. "Pike's men came to the camp. After you left, he promised us flour, meat for winter. He said you were bringing war on us. He gave me a gold coin. For my family." The weight of betrayal pressed down, thick and sickening. "He told them where you went," Koa said flatly, disgust in his voice. "The goat track, every step." Taye looked at Running Wolf. Terror, shame, hunger, not betrayal, only a boy trying to save his family. "You were afraid," Taye said quietly, ragged but steady. "You did what you thought would protect your own. The gold is a lie, but the hunger was real. There is no betrayal here, only a mistake," he told the boy. "You are new. You are my brother," Taye said. Running Wolf let out a choked sob. "This is absurd," Pike roared. "Sentimental nonsense. The word of a traitorous Indian against a citizen. This is my property." Lila stepped forward. Dress torn, mud-stained, dark with Taye's blood, hair plastered to her face, eyes burning. "I am not your property, Mr. Pike." Her voice cut through the room, sharp, clear. Silence fell. Even the soldiers paused. "I am not your collateral. I am not my uncle's asset. I am not a thing to be bought, sold, or traded." Lila stepped closer to Taye, placing her hand firmly on his uninjured arm, studying him as if she were carving the truth into her own memory. "And he knows it," she said, voice trembling, gaining strength with every word. "This man has never touched me without my permission. He has never once treated me as less than human," she continued, eyes sweeping the room. "Which is more than any so-called civilized man in this room can say." Silence fell, heavy as a canyon cliff. Judge Boone nodded once, sharply. "I see," she said, stepping forward. "Taye, you are claiming the contents of this box show evidence of fraud, bribery, and a conspiracy to defraud the United States government and the Numu people." "I swear it," Taye said. "Evelyn, Lila," the deputy's voice echoed. "Bring the box forward." Lila pulled a clean ledger from a shelf and opened to a fresh page. "I am taking your sworn affidavit, here and now, in this place." Her pen flew over the paper. "Taye, Judge Boone asked, do you swear that the water of Cottonwood Springs is the ancestral right of your people, protected by the Treaty of 1867? "I swear," Taye answered. "Do you swear you witnessed the forgeries and the bribe receipts in this lockbox, created by Silas Pike or his agents?" "I swear." "Sign," Boone commanded. Lila scrawled her name, bold and unwavering. Taye took the pen in his left hand, clumsy but deliberate, and made his mark beside hers. Boone lit a stick of red wax, dripped a heavy seal, and pressed her signet ring into it. "Sealed, under the authority of the territorial court," she said, voice ringing. "Pike, your buttered lies end here. You have nothing. Our word outweighs yours." The deputy stepped aside. Pike's soaked, bound, and beaten foreman, Wade Hale, was shoved into the room. His eyes locked on Pike. Dead, hopeless. "He would have let me hang," Hale said through his ruined nose, voice thick. "He told me to kill her. Permanently." "You are now facing charges of attempted murder, Mr. Hale," Judge Boone said, cold and precise. Full cooperation is your only hope. Where's the money? Hale spat at Pike, a single spark of defiance flickering. The railroad payoffs, gold, buried under the floor of the old assay office by the creek, he rasped. He intended to run after selling the water. Rest, Mr. Pike, Judge Boone said flatly, as the deputy snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. Pike's face drained of color. You own nothing here, sir. As the deputy guided him toward the door, Pike's eyes locked on Lila. Pure reptilian hatred twisted his face. You, he hissed. You think this is over. You are nothing. Just the girl I let him buy. Taye surged forward, a roar burning in his chest, but Lila placed her hand on his good arm, holding him back. She stared Pike down, steady, unflinching. I chose, she said, calm as a mountain morning. Pike was dragged into the rain, and the warehouse fell into silence. Only Taye's ragged breathing and the steady drum of rain filled the space. Then night exploded. Not a single shot, but a volley. Gunfire crashed from the far end of the street. Glass shattered. Men screamed. The Triangle Spur, the deputy yelled. They're freeing the boss. But it wasn't just gunfire. They were riding. A dozen, maybe 15 men, spurred into the main street, yelling, pistols blazing. Disorder reigned. Not soldiers, not disciplined men, just a drunken, leaderless mob, furious their paymaster had been taken. A bullet tore through the deputy's leg. He fell, rifle skittering across the mud. Pike, seeing his chance, bolted into the dark alley between the mercantile and the assay office. Taye! Someone shouted. He was on his feet, fever forgotten, rifle in his good hand, moving toward the church to regroup. The town erupted into chaos. Doors slammed, women screamed, horses reared. Judge Boone, her face carved from ice and fury, dragged her wounded deputy behind a horse trough. She snatched up his shotgun and bellowed, "Barricade the courthouse!" Hank grabbed Taye, lifting him halfway off the ground. "You're no shape to—" Hank began. "I can stand," Taye gritted, pale and slick with sweat and rain, eyes locking with Lila's. "Go, run!" But Lila did not run. She moved to his other side, slipping his good arm over her shoulder, taking his weight. "We go together. No monasamastum." Koa provided cover, his Spencer rifle cracking, forcing 2 riders to scatter in a chaotic tumble across the open street. Bullets tore up the mud at their feet. They slammed through the heavy oak doors of the small stone church, just as Hank and Koa hurled their weight against them, dropping the iron bar into place. Safe, but trapped. The church was dark, smelling of old wax, damp stone, and fear. In the front pews, a few women, the preacher's wife and the baker's daughters, huddled, weeping. Stone could not burn, but fear could cut just as sharp. Hank panted, checking the long windows. "They can break the glass." "Then we make it a fort," said a new voice. An old man, skin like dried leather, hair in long, coarse braids, stepped from the vestry. He carried a carpenter's hammer. "2 logs," he said, nodding to Taye. "I was fixing the roof leak. Bad night for it." Taye nodded, leaning against the wall, shoulder burning like white-hot fire. "The pews. We need barricades." "Already done," the old man said, pointing. The women, seeing him take charge, had helped drag 2 of the heaviest pews on their sides to block the main doors, forming a second wall. "Lila," Taye said, voice tight. "The women. Back room vestry. Tearcloth. We'll have wounded." Lila's fear was a cold, hard knot, but her hands were steady. She led the frightened women into the small room, pulling altar cloths and choir robes from a chest, tearing them into long, clean strips. Outside, gunfire rattled continuously. The Triangle Spur men rode the street, shooting at the courthouse, realizing where the fugitives had gone. At the church, stained glass shattered inward, showering the pews with shards of colored fragments. "I need to see," Koa said, looking up at the bell tower. A narrow ladder climbed into darkness. "I can be their eyes," he said. "It's a target," Taye warned. "We are all targets," Koa replied, voice hardened beyond his years. He grabbed his rifle and was up the ladder before Taye could protest. "Hank, the side door," Taye ordered. "2 logs, the windows," he added. "Block them." Taye himself took a position near the front, rifle resting across the back of a pew. He tried to aim, but the world swam before him. Fever burned his body. His left arm was a useless, searing weight. "Taye, you're bleeding again," Lila said, returning from the vestry. The cauterized wound had reopened during their run. Later, a man had been hit in the street, a merchant fleeing his shop, clutching a cash box, falling and crying out. "We have to get him," one of the baker's daughters cried from the vestry door. "No," Hank shouted. "It's suicide." Before Taye could move, Lila sprang into action. "Keep them pinned!" she shouted to Koa above. She cracked the side door, the one that led to the small cemetery, moving low, using tombstones as cover. "Damn her," Hank hissed, providing cover fire from the window. Evelyn reached the wounded man, finding him hit in the leg, every step a calculated risk in the storm of bullets and chaos. Lila grabbed him under the arms, dragging him back, stone by stone, toward the church. The heat of exertion burned through her, but she did not falter. She shoved him through the side door and slammed it shut. Both of them collapsed onto the cold stone floor. "You're a fool," Taye gasped, voice thick with terrifying relief. "I'm a teacher," Lila panted, moving immediately to work on the boy's leg. Above, Koa's rifle spoke, sharp, regular, cutting the night. He had been keeping the riders pinned, forcing them back across the street. "They're moving," he yelled down. Leaning out too far, a heavier shot cracked from the mercantile roof. Koa let out a sharp grunt and tumbled from the ladder, crashing hard onto the stone floor below. "Koa!" Taye roared, pushing himself forward, but his legs buckled. Lila was already there. The boy was conscious, face twisted in pain, clutching his side. It burns." Lila tore open his shirt. A long, deep gash ran along his ribs, dark and furious. "It's bad, but the lungs are clear. Get him to the vestry," she commanded Hank. They carried him swiftly. Lila laid him on the preacher's cot. "Pressure, hold this," she ordered one of the women. Her eyes scanned the room. No doctor, no medicine. Then she spotted a barrel in the corner. "What is that?" the preacher's wife whimpered. "Flour, communion bread." And suddenly, a memory, sharp as a knife, a battlefield remedy her grandmother had told her, back in the old country. She grabbed a handful of the fine, white flour. "What are you doing?" Hank asked. "Hold him," Lila said, inhaling deeply, packing the flour hard into the gash. Koa screamed, a raw, choked sound. His eyes rolled back. But Lila did not stop. She pressed the powder tight until it turned a thick, dark red paste, and the bleeding slowed, then stopped. She took a long altar strip and bound his ribs tightly. "He will live," she said, voice shaking. "He will live." A heavy thud shook the front doors of the church. A log, a battering ram. "They're coming in," the old carpenter said, calm, holding his hammer. Taye stood, swaying. Fever, blood loss, exhaustion, it all converged. He moved toward the front, rifle in his one good hand. The bar groaned, wood splintering. "Get back!" he barked at Hank. "They'll come from the side!" The log snapped. The doors burst open. 3 men spilled into the church. Severo met them swinging a heavy iron candle like a club. The old carpenter's hammer flew. One man went down. A fourth, younger than the others, barely more than a boy, scrambled through a shattered window. He saw Taye, 20 feet away, and raised his pistol, eyes wide with fear and whiskey. Taye's rifle rose. Barrel leveled at the boy's chest. An easy shot, but he saw the terror, the foolish rage, the pride he didn't understand. He saw himself, 16 years old. The boy fired. The shot missed, smashing a plaster saint on the wall. Taye lunged with his one good arm, swinging the heavy rifle like a bat, slamming it against the boy's gun hand. The pistol flew. The boy screamed, clutching broken fingers, staring at Taye, disbelief written across his face. "You've been spared. Get out," Taye commanded. Taye's voice was low, a growl that rumbled from deep in his chest. "Go home. This is not your fight, not your death." The boy stared, wide-eyed, then scrambled back through the broken window, disappearing into the dark night. The battle at the church door had ended. Hank's arm was cut, blood soaking his sleeve, but the other two attackers were retreating. Outside, gunfire had turned sporadic, confused, echoing off the wet streets. Then a new sound joined the storm. A clamor, metallic and chaotic. Clang, clang, clang. "What's that?" Hank panted, struggling to catch his breath. Taye moved to the shattered window, peering out. The townsfolk, long hidden in shadow, now surged into the street. The baker, the livery owner, the old women from the hotel. They weren't armed with rifles, but with pots, pans, wagon wheels, anything to make noise. Their fury was raw and defiant. The Vanes men were thrown into confusion. Gunmen, not soldiers, used to being feared, not challenged. The riders circled their horses, flustered as the people grew bolder. Bricks, stones, handfuls of gravel and sand were hurled at the horses' eyes. One stallion screamed, rearing blind. Its rider stumbled and fell, unable to continue. Panic rippled through Pike's gang. They had no plan, no leader, no pay to justify this chaos. They scattered, riding hard out of town, dissolving back into the plains. Silence fell. Only the rain, groans from the wounded, and the soft sobbing of a woman lingered in the air. "It's over," Hank said, leaning against the wall, voice hoarse. Taye's gaze swept the street, sharp and unrelenting. "Where's Pike?" Judge Boone asked, emerging from the courthouse. Her dress caked with mud, her face streaked with smoke and rain. She carried her shotgun like a weapon of justice. "He's a rat, Your Honor," Taye said. "Rats run for the sewers." The freight train hissed on the tracks, steam rising into the storm. Pike had cornered himself on the loading platform, attempting to pry open a boxcar. Judge Boone stepped onto the platform, the rain dripping from her wide-brimmed hat. She unfolded a sheet of paper, moving with the calm authority of the law itself. "The affidavit," she said, voice slicing through the hiss of the train. "Signed and sealed by Lila and Taye. Mr. Silas Pike, I have here a legal warrant from the territorial court. Charges of conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and 2 counts of attempted murder. You are under arrest." Pike stared at the paper. He looked at Taye. He looked at Hank. He knew. It was over. As they began to lead him away, a sudden movement caught their eyes. Amos Doyle, crouched in an empty water trough, shivering. When he saw Lila, tears poured down his face. He fell to his knees in the mud, clutching at her dress. "Evelyn, I mean Lila, you have to tell them. It wasn't me. It was Pike. He forced me, the girl, the auction. It was his plan. I helped him. I gave him the saloon records because I had to. Evie, I am your family." Lila looked down at the crumpled, pathetic man who had sold her. Her face was cold, detached. No anger, no pity, only an icy emptiness. She yanked her dress free from his grasp. "No," she said, voice quiet but steel sharp. "You are not my family." Turning to Judge Boone, she added firmly, "He is guilty, Your Honor. He confessed, but I do not want him in your jail. It's too crowded." "What do you ask for, Miss Hart?" Judge Boone's voice was firm, carrying across the damp street. "The deed," Lila said without hesitation. "The saloon, the building, the land it sits on. He will sign it over to me for my school." Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "Yes, yes, anything," Amos Doyle sobbed, trembling as the deputy shoved a wet transfer form into his hands. He scrawled his name, barely legible through shaking fingers, then scrambled to his feet and ran into the darkness, vanishing like a guilty shadow. The rain softened, and the blackened sky to the east began to lighten. A new sound joined the quiet. Slow, steady, resonant. Bong, bong, bong. Hank, his arm still in a sling, grinned. "2 logs," he said, nodding to the old carpenter beside him. The church bell rang, clear and commanding, a signal to all who had survived. They were alive. The sound washed over the muddy streets, echoing with hope. Taye stood, head high. Lila moved to his side, sliding her arm around his waist, steadying him. He burned with fever, but he was alive. They had paid for their freedom in blood, sweat, and fear. But as the bell rang, they were truly free for the first time. The fever that had gripped Taye for 3 days broke like a thunderstorm over the plains. He awoke to silence, the scent of clean linen and fresh coffee filling the small back room of Hank's smithy. Lila sat slumped in a chair beside him, her head resting on folded arms, pale and shadowed with exhaustion. His shoulder was tightly bandaged, stitches pulling the skin. He was weak but alive, and clean. The simple absence of mud and blood felt like a miracle. Lila had worked while he drifted, tending to every wound. She had walked to the saloon, deed in hand, and thrown open the batwing doors. The town had paused to watch. She began smashing every bottle behind the bar, one by one, the sound crisp and satisfying as whiskey, old sweat, and the sour ghost of her uncle's greed splintered into the street. When she finished, the old Cheyenne carpenter, 2 logs, appeared. He didn't ask. He merely nodded. "A school," he said. "Needs benches. That bar's good hardwood." By the time Taye stood, leaning on a cane Hank had carved for him, the saloon was gone. Whitewashed walls replaced grime. Windows that had been opaque now let in the bright, hard light of the high plains. The long bar had been sawed, planed, and reassembled into 5 sturdy benches. A huge slate, donated by the new mercantile owner, hung where the mirror once had been. Koa, his ribs tightly bound and arm in a sling, was her first official pupil, followed by his younger sister. Then came Mrs. Ruis, the baker's wife, and the woman who had led the banging of pots, her 2 sons in tow. "They know how to bake," Mrs. Roos announced, hands on her hips. "But they don't know how to read. This must be fixed." Lila stood before them, chalk in hand. 4 children, 2 from the town, 2 from the band, waited expectantly. She drew a large, clear A on the slate. "This," she said, voice ringing strong in the quiet room, "is A." She spoke the sound clearly, then turned to Koa and his sister. She said the word Tau had taught her for antelope. The first bilingual school on the Llano Estacada was in session. The celebration was held at Cottonwood Springs, 2 weeks after the battle. It was no ordinary holiday. It was a feast of survivors. The scar of Pike's destroyed dam still marred the earth, but grass was returning, and the springs ran clear and bright. Hank roasted 2 goats over a slow, long fire. Mrs. Ruis, now self-appointed head of community events, organized the townswomen to bring baskets of cornbread, apple pies, and fresh butter. Taye's band rode in from the high country, not as warriors, but as families. They brought smoked venison, dried wild plums, and roasted pecans. Mexican, Anglo, Comanche, all sat together on blankets by the liberated water, breaking bread, sharing stories, and reclaiming their home. Judge Boone rode up to the schoolhouse, her black robes set aside for a practical split skirt and a crisp white blouse. She watched the children, a dozen now, laughing and shrieking as they chased each other along the edge of Cottonwood Springs. Some were town kids, some from Taye's band, all free under the wide prairie sky. Her gaze found Taye and Lila sitting together on a bench, sharing a small plate. Taye still moved stiffly, his good arm supporting his weight while the other remained in a sling. "The court," Judge Boone said, her voice carrying the faintest hint of a smile, "likes to finalize its paperwork, Miss Hart." She handed Lila a folded bundle of heavy papers, tied neatly with a ribbon. It was the deed, officially filed and stamped with the territorial seal, the Fort Ellison School. The words seemed to shine on the paper. Lila's hands trembled as she held it, looking at the building that had once felt like a prison. Now it was freedom incarnate. The judge turned to Taye, producing a second, thicker packet. "Mr. Taye," she said, loud enough for the elders gathered nearby, "this is a federal injunction based on the Treaty of 1867 and the overwhelming evidence of fraud from Silas Pike's lockbox. It affirms your band's soul," she continued, "their traditional and binding rights to the waters of Cottonwood Springs, in perpetuity. Any appeal Pike's lawyers lodge from federal custody will fail." Taye took the papers, studying the strange black marks of authority. It was the white man's power, the same force that had taken so much from them, now returning what was his. 3 days later, Hank brought the Fort Ellison Gazette to the schoolhouse. A broad grin split his face as he handed it to Taye. He spread the paper across a bench. He had learned to read the white man's language slowly, laboriously, sounding out the headline, "Pike Conspiracy Broken. Community, Cooperation, Secures Land and Water." His eyes fell on his own name. He read the sentence again, lips moving silently. Comanche leader Taye. Not savage, not renegade, not buck. Just a man, a neighbor. He scanned the column further. The reporter described the town's defense as an act of unified heroism. His eyes met Lila's across the room. She had seen the shift, the first recognition of him in the world of laws and headlines. The injunction was good, but winter was coming. Hunger would not be delayed by papers. That night, the band gathered for a different kind of meeting. Not a celebration, but planning. They sat at the long table the old carpenter, 2 logs, had built in the schoolhouse. Taye, his elders, Hank and Lila, gathered around. Her notebook lay open, pencil poised. "The water is ours," Taye said quietly. "But an injunction won't feed us. We need grain. We need to survive the winter." "We need a way to live," Hank said. "The horses. Taye, you still have the studs. The best bloodline on the Llano Estacada. The mayors know it. The town knows it." Taye nodded. "But grain for the deep snow, access to the eastern markets, the railroad cars?" "The mercantile," Hank added, "is under new management now. An honest man from St. Louis. He wants business. He'll supply grain, veterinary needs." "A partnership," Lila said, pencil flying. "A cooperative. The new band raises the horses. The town merchants provide supplies and access to the railroad." "And the profit?" one of the elders asked, his voice gravelly. "The profit is split 50-50 on paper," Lila said, meeting the man's eyes. Transparent, accountable. Taye looked at Hank. The smith nodded. The elders nodded. This was no charity, no handout. It was a shared rope, a tether to a future, a life rebuilt. They rowed out to the springs as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. The crowds had thinned. The air carried a crisp bite, the first hint of frost brushing their cheeks. The torn, muddy earth of the old dam had begun to settle, and the water now ran clear and bright over smooth stones. They stood at the bank, alone. For a long moment they simply listened to the water rushing, alive and free. "I'm still afraid," Lila finally said, her voice soft, almost swallowed by the evening wind. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the water. "I'm afraid I'll wake up. That this peace isn't real. That I'll turn, and the saloon will still be a saloon. That the water will be gone. That you'll be gone." Taye turned to her. He understood the weight of her fear. It lived deep in his own bones. He had seen too many promises break, too many good things turn to ash. "I have the same fear," he admitted, his voice low. "I'm afraid that one day you'll see me, see the man from the plains, the savage the papers used to write about, your school, your books, this town you're building. It will not be enough. You'll see me, and you'll leave." "I will never," she began, eyes wide with defiance. "Do not promise never," he said, voice sharp, intense. He placed his good hand on her arm. "Promise me the truth. This marriage began as a lie to stop a lie. It cannot live as one. If the day comes when your heart changes, promise me you'll speak it before it's too late." "I promise," she whispered, the terrible, beautiful weight of honesty threading through her words. "And you must promise the same," he said, drawing a small, flat, dark stone from the pouch at his belt. "No more ghosts, no more secrets, no matter how hard the truth is." He had found the stone by the river during the long nights of his recovery, carving it carefully with the tip of his knife. It bore a single, deep image, a horse running free, its mane whipping in the wind. He knelt, his wounded shoulder protesting, but his body was strong. He placed the carved stone at the base of the small stack they had left from the storm, their first shared fire. It was not a grave marker. It was not a claim. It was an anchor, a promise. To stay. The water of the spring flowed over it. Taye rose and took her hand. The cottonwoods bloomed late that year, releasing their seeds like tiny white puffs, drifting on the breeze over the clear water. It was a soft snow of survival, settling on the shoulders of those gathered. It was not a grand wedding. No church, no organ, no feast for 100 guests. There was only the land, the water, and the people who had fought for it. Judge Boone stood on a flat stone, her law book in hand, black dress trimmed with a small lace collar for the occasion. Several witnesses were present. Taye's arm in a clean sling, standing as witness. Mrs. Ruis, who had wept when Lila first asked her, holding a bundle of wildflowers. Taye's band and elders stood in quiet dignity. 2 logs, the carpenter, had come, and Koa, still with his ribs tightly bound, stood at the front, grinning so wide it looked painful. Taye himself wore clean buckskins, simple, unadorned, save for the new dark stitches on his shoulder. Fever gone, strength returning, he watched Lila approach. She did not wear white. She wore her blue Sunday dress, the same one from the saloon, now mended and washed free of mud and blood, a defiant statement. This was the dress of her capture, now reclaimed as the dress of her freedom. Judge Boone's voice rang crisp, carrying over the rush of the spring. "We are gathered here today, under the law of the territory and the eye of God, to join this man and this woman. We are here to take a document, a paper that began as a shield and make it a bond, not of property, but of partnership. She read the simple, formal words. Dry, legal, official. But out here, in the open air, they felt weighty, real. When she asked Taye if he took this woman as his lawfully wedded wife, he didn't say, "I do." He looked at Lila, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I choose her," he said, his voice low, certain, carrying across the bank. "This day, and all the days." When the judge asked Lila, she smiled, her eyes bright in the fading light. "I choose him, this day and all the days." "By the power vested in me," Judge Boone said, her voice firm and clear, "I pronounce you husband and wife." But the moment was not finished. An elder of Taye's Moonyu band stepped forward, his face a map of the plains, weathered and lined. He began a low, steady chant, speaking not to them, but to the water, the sky, and the ancestors. His voice carried the blessing of the land and the wind. He raised his hands, calling on earth and air, weaving two rituals into one stream. Lila's hands trembled. Taye took them gently. She held out a small first-reader book, a gift for him. On the cover, carefully stitched in neat embroidery, was his name. Taye. "This," she said, her voice thick with meaning, "is for the lessons we will write together, our future." Taye took it reverently in his left hand, his good hand, careful not to crush the delicate gift. He had a gift for her, too. Not a ring, but a long strip of horsehair, braided with dyed porcupine quills into a fine, intricate pattern. A master horseman's reins. "My hands," he said, voice rough with the rare tenderness. "My strength, my trade, my heart. This is all I have to give." He looped the reins gently around her wrist. The elder brought a single white ribbon and tied their hands together. Taye's left to Lila's right. The knot was simple, a link, not a prison. The first to embrace them was Koa. He threw his good arm around Taye, then, with surprising courage, hugged Lila tightly. "You're my sister now," he whispered, voice cracking. "And you're my brother," she whispered back, eyes squeezed shut. Koa stepped back, regaining his composure, glancing from the schoolhouse to Taye. "It's a good arrangement," he declared, voice loud. "I'm a student, but I'm also the head stable manager for the new Comanche cooperative horse program. Very important." Lila laughed. "And who appointed you?" "I did," Taye said, a rare, bright smile lighting his face. "The only one who can read feed orders and break a wild horse. A strange school, yes, but I think I'll like it." Koa grinned, looking at the benches and blackboard, the saddle hanging on the wall. News of the outside world came slowly. Silas Pike had been sent east on the back of a train, escorted to a federal courthouse. His lawyers, paid with the last of his hidden gold, argued jurisdiction, but the evidence, lockbox, bribery, mail fraud, conspiracy, was ironclad. His sentence had been reduced to 10 years in a hard rock prison in the east, a cage for a man who once ruled the plains. Amos Doyle was never seen again, vanished into the west like a ghost, leaving only quiet relief. The saloon was now a memory. The dry season came, but without fear. The mercantile, under honest new management, honored the cooperative. Grain wagons rolled out to Taye's camp. Horses of Taye's paint bloodline were led to the railroad cars, each flank stamped with the new cooperative brand, a simple circle representing the springs. The train whistle still sounded lonely, but it no longer brought threat. It carried supplies, books for Lila's school, now 20 children sitting on benches built by Taye and 2 logs, glass for windows, seeds for new gardens. A line of connection, not conquest. That evening, Taye and Lila walked to the springs, cool air, deep bruised purple sky. The cottonwoods swayed, green and alive, whispering in the wind. The schoolhouse was quiet. The town was calm. They stood at the edge where Taye had placed the carved stone, where Judge Boone had bound their hands. Lila knelt, touching the smooth, cold surface of the stone. The carved horse felt familiar beneath her fingers. Taye knelt beside her, sliding his hand over hers. His palm was warm, steady, rough against the softness of her skin. They didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. She thought of the saloon, the terror, the shame of being treated like an object. "You know," she whispered, "he was wrong. Pike, I was never a thing to be bought. I wasn't even just a person to be rescued," she added, her voice gaining strength. Taye's dark eyes met hers, calm in the fading light. "I was someone who was chosen," she said firmly, "and I am someone who chooses him back every single sunrise." He lifted her hand, keeping his over hers, and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles. They stayed kneeling there by the rushing water, their hands locked over the stone that marked their home. Freedom, she realized, wasn't about breaking chains. It wasn't about running. It was about finding a hand in the dark and choosing to hold it, no matter how hard the wind, no matter how deep the dust. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you. Truly. Aviso legal bara disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.